Hello and welcome to UC Today. My name's David Dungay. We are here for another marketplace discussion. I have with me Dr Scott of Allendevaux Companies. Welcome to the show, Scott. How are you?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Fantastic. So Allendevaux works with UC companies in the data protection space, and today we're going to be speaking about what that data protection landscape looks like in the modern era. Let's get straight into our first question. Scott, what have been the significant changes in the data protection landscape over the last 2 to 3 years for business customers?
That's a good question. So when we think about the incredible speed of data protection transformation that's really just unfolding, I see people having different kinds of reactions. On one hand, some companies and individuals, they're just, gripping the roller coaster bars. They're trying to hold on because so much is happening. Other companies, though, are still completely unaware that it's illegal for UC operators and cloud service providers to collect and process information without implementing a data protection program. So, they're aloof to the hefty fines from regulators and the lawsuits that are amassing. Some of them are ill-informed about data breaches. In fact, that they can close the doors of 60% of SMBs that experience them. So a lot's changed, and I would say a lot's changing because data protections, they're to be taken seriously. The laws are changing. But can I just take a moment, David, to kind of unpack the context that we find ourselves in to paint a picture?
Sure.
So here's the context. The world's largest enterprises, they're no longer the aerospace companies or the oil producers by default. We've heard it said that data is the new gold. Data-driven companies, they're really kind of changing and driving this digital landscape. We think about the largest companies, we think of Meta, they're worth $500 billion, they're data-driven. We think of Alphabet, they're worth more than $1 trillion, they're data-driven. We think about Google, largely data-driven, worth over $2 trillion. Even companies like Airbnb, they don't even own any hotels. They're worth $75 billion, data-driven. Uber doesn't even have any taxis that they own, yet they're worth $62 billion. They're data-driven. So data, we think about data, we think of it as the new gold, and it's exploding at such a fast pace that 99% of the world's data has been created in the last 10 years. That means 10 years ago, the digital footprint of humanity was only 1% the size that it is today. So it's a type of digital big bang when we think of it that way that we're really witnessing, and the digital universe seems to really be picking up speed in terms of its expansion. Yet with all the benefits of this digital big bang, cloud service providers are involved in, there's this dark side of data as well. Those that are trying to exploit vulnerable companies and vulnerable people, the hackers and the crackers, that they have no guilt ransoming the data of a hospital or shutting down a power plant or stealing the retirement of a grandmother and leaving her with nothing. So governments who have the responsibility to afford protections to their citizens, what are they doing? They're stepping in, and that's what governments do. Governments have afforded all kinds of protections, financial protections to their citizens, healthcare protections, social protections, physical protections from foreign adversaries, and now data protections. So to answer the question about the significant changes of the last few years in data protections, it's really understanding the legal landscape that's rapidly unfolding across the globe, because data protections are being put in place by governments. In fact, according to the latest report by the United Nations, more than 130 countries have now implemented data protections that require, security and privacy practices to be implemented.
Fantastic. Well, let's take that to the sort of the operators and CSP level. Then you mentioned a few things just there. Maybe we could touch on some of those challenges that they're faced with when it comes to complying with these data protection laws.
Sure, there's all kinds of challenge, and I would say the first really is awareness and understanding. And most companies are really having difficulty keeping up with all that's happening, meaning staying aware of what's happening and understanding what's happening. They don't They don't always know what's happening with the latest data protection laws, where it's happening, why it's happening, what they should do, even if they do know. So to be a UC operator or a cloud service provider in this space, you have to understand the statutory landscape. You have to be able to comply with laws where your customers are located. So let's say you have customers in the EEA and in North America. Just with that footprint alone, you're looking at over 150 laws to read and track and dissect and integrate into your company's data protection program. So let's face it, most companies, they don't know where to start. Some hire an in-house attorney, and even that individual feels overwhelmed or lost about what to do. And look, I realize the challenges are real, and I realize the landscape is fluid, and I realize regulators are always ready to investigate if you get it wrong. But there is a way to do it rightly. Even in complex environments, to afford proper protections and to comply with these laws. So those that do it right, they'll actually be setting themselves up, I think, to thrive in this new digital, explosion.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. How easy is it to solve these complexity issues around data as it passes through these different regulatory jurisdictions?
Well, complexity issues, they can be solved when using a tried and true approach. So let me paint a picture of this context as well so that we can talk about something called jurisdictional complexity. Well, when we think about data, it's usually in one of three states. It's data at rest, data being processed, or data in transit. So companies are required to afford equal protection to data in any of those three states, at rest, being processed, or in transit. So when data is in transit, interesting things can happen. Think about if a packet is moving from Frankfurt to London to New Jersey to California, the laws change that surround that packet's payload, even if as it's traveling, at speeds around the Earth. So if you have a service that serves customers around the world, and you're moving data between those jurisdictions, like in this conversation that we're having here, you'll be dealing with matters referred to as complex compliance, which is one of my favorite topics, dealing with matters of complex jurisprudence. So for instance, a lot of people don't know that it's illegal to transfer personal data from the EU to the United States, by way of example, without implementing the right systems of governance. So let's say you want to change your cloud services back end, maybe, and you're using MailChimp, but you want to switch it to SendGrid through Twilio. You're not permitted to do that without giving your customers a written notice and giving them the opportunity to accept or to object that particular change. So there are these nuances when we think about complex compliance. So when building a data protection program, it's important to engineer that program to streamline all these kinds of decisions and all these types of flows, and also to be able to integrate all the relevant laws into that data protection program and then change them as the laws evolve. Because getting this wrong causes complications, but getting it right really gives companies a competitive edge.
Yeah, and of course, companies don't always get it right as well. So, in terms of reputational damage and the risk of fines, which you've kind of touched on already a little bit, these are just some of the consequences to people that suffer data breaches. But once a company's been breached, is it too late to act at that stage?
I'd say it depends, right? So there's a study that the Ponemon Institute released, and I think the statistic in there is that 60% of small and medium businesses that suffer a data breach will close their door within 6 months. That's a pretty startling, statistic when you think about it, because the problems they begin to add up when a breach happens. Reputational damage is real, right? Customer attrition when that starts to happen to competitors is very real. The lawsuits are very real. They use company resources to defend against them. Regulatory investigations are very real. Serious penalties and fines are very real. Not to mention, it uses up time from key stakeholders in the businesses that need to be focusing on, driving business growth, but instead they're defending the company against this data breach that happens. So If a company has a data breach and there is not a proper data protection program in place, I would say, in my opinion, it would likely mean game over. So if you don't have a data protection program, you've got to fix that right away. But if you do have a good data protection program and a breach still happens, you're going to be able to demonstrate aspects of due care and due diligence. You'll have practiced breach management scenarios. You'll be ready. You'll know what to do in the event that if the unfortunate ransomware attack were to happen. You will have steps to take. You'll have mitigations that you'll immediately be able to put in place. I guess a good analogy would be like, having a fire department that's ready to respond. There may be a fire, but you have professionals who are ready to fight that particular fire and to respond. But a company without a data protection program doesn't even have a fire department to respond to any of the blazes, and that's why it's often game over in those situations.
Yeah. Being prepared is the best form of defence for sure. Okay, so let's we're getting towards the end of the session, but let's leave our viewers with some top tips. I really want to get your top piece of advice for operators and businesses that want to ensure that they're compliant today, but also continue to stay compliant as changes do happen in the regulatory landscape.
Sure, David. So, not to hit on it too many times, but I can't say it enough. If you don't have a data protection program, I really think it's only a matter of time before that company would become the next headline. So put one in place. Second, it's so important to understand the laws and the regulations that apply to a business. So to say you're not aware of a law or a regulation isn't an excuse. It's like if an officer pulls you over in the car and you're going twice the speed limit in a speed zone. You're still liable, even if you weren't aware of that particular speed limit. So be aware of the laws that apply to your organization. That's a topic I think all on its own, to how to know which laws are applicable to your organization, and we should talk about that sometime. But third, I would say subscribe to publications that provide updates about data protection laws around the world. They're changing all the time, and I get that. You think about the fact that, just think about one country. In the United States alone, there's 280 pending bills in state legislators that are vying to become data protection laws. So when you take that kind of activity and you look at what's happening in all the other countries around the world, you really have to subscribe to publications to keep it all straight. Fourth, I would say develop a legal register and populate it with the laws that apply to your organization, because data protection program, it's data protection law, it's here to stay. And so if you need help with that, just send me an email and I'll help you get going. So I'll leave it with this. Look, businesses, they often look at security and privacy controls as straitjackets, keeping businesses from being innovative and doing what they want to do. But I think when it's done rightly, UC operators and cloud service providers can collect and process the data that they need and the data that they want in the depth that they need it, because there's ways to do it securely and responsibly and respectfully and lawfully, I think, in this new era of data protection law in practice, while still being innovative. So I'll keep those tips to that for now, tips to ensure that you're compliant.
Great stuff. Well, lots of really insightful information there. Thank you so much for that, Scott. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, David. Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you for watching. You've been watching me, David Dungay, on UC Today. Don't forget to have a look around the rest of the marketplace. There's loads of information that can help you and your business in the future. That's it from me. See you next time.